Hi, I'm Roberto Baldwin, and welcome to the Stupid Podcast Ideas podcast, where we take your worst podcast schemes, talk about what they could have been, and promptly send them to the lair of ghosts and wind. A new podcast will be available every Tuesday and Thursday until folks decide they just don't want to talk to me anymore. This week's episode is sponsored by Gravel, by the American Gravel Association. Smaller than rocks, larger than sand, it's gravel, filling the holes in your life since 2 million BC. Now, today is the very first episode of the Stupid Podcast Ideas podcast, and my guest is Enbgadget review wrangler, Kris Naudus. How you doing, Kris?
I'm doing fine. I love gravel so much.
Gravel's awesome.
Yeah, you just gave me another idea for a terrible podcast.
Yeah, I'm going to put some gravel down, and then I'm going to count them. Like you can. There's so many. So I bought a house recently, and there are so many different types of gravel. We had to go to 4 different places to match the gravel that is in our backyard, and we spent a lot of money buying gravel.
But was it worth it?
It does look nice. I mean, they're really just really tiny rocks, but they look nice. They're nice tiny rocks, and they're not sharp or stabby or anything.
Yeah, I was thinking I could have a show about all the times I've been hit in the face by gravel. We'd have 3 episodes, and and then we'd tell people episode 4 is coming as soon as the quarantine is over, and we can walk along the roadside and against traffic in a very dangerous manner again. Next
to gravel.
Yes.
And speaking of the quarantine, how have you been dealing with the sort of stay-at-home order? Like, what are you doing? Are you playing video? I know you're a nerd, as am I. We worked together at Enbgadget for 5 years, nearly 5 years, almost like 4 years and like 10 or 11 months.
Who's really counting? Except you, of course.
Well, I only count because LinkedIn told me how long I was there. I literally wouldn't have known.
I think LinkedIn is also the one that will be like 39 years, 7 months, and 3 days. And I'm like, really? Really? You're going to tell me how old I am?
To the second. So what are you doing? Are you playing games? Are you reading comics? Do you have a slingshot and you're just shooting pigeons out your window? What are you doing?
Okay, slingshot, that's Animal Crossing, which I am playing like every other human being on Earth, apparently. Except, I don't know if you are, but...
I just got a Nintendo Switch, so I'm just playing Mario Kart and that Goose game and a bunch of NES games. So I have a lot on my plate.
I love the Goose game, though now like I'm wary of geese I see on the street, even though I was already wary, and now I'm just like, you fucker, you're going to steal my glasses and then make me buy them back from like the Chinese market.
Oh no, they totally would. Geese are evil.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I don't go out a lot, or haven't been going out a lot before quarantine, which is kind of the bummer for me because, I was like January, February, I'm like, I don't want to go out. It's cold. I'm depressed. Life sucks.
Yeah.
Like March is gonna be my month.
Oh.
Yeah.
Single tear.
Yeah, I went out like the beginning of March. Well, rather, I went to Boston for PAX East at the end of February. That was like my last like hurrah in public. Mm-hmm. Like me, my best friend, and my brother were just like, Boston, yeah, let's eat burgers and play video games and never leave our house again after this. Yeah. And then, like I go out once a week just to get some exercise, and I go bird watching. I'm like, oh, geese, oh, pigeons, oh, robins, oh, what the fuck was that?
That's a bird.
Yeah, I saw cardinals today. That's spring is coming. It's great. But yeah, I mean, besides that, and I go out for groceries, and like it's just kind of my normal routine when I'm depressed and sad, which I've read articles that say that people who suffer from depression and anxiety, this is like their golden era now. They're doing fine. They're like surprised by how fine they're doing.
Well, I think, yeah, well, I think it's individuals, how people are individually dealing with it. And, it's, I am a little irritated by if you're not like doing something this crazy, if you're not writing a book or starting a company, or you're wasting time, or you're lazy. It's a really weird time, and I'm just exhausted by the end of the day. When because I'm writing about I write about cars, so I should just be driving cars and then writing about cars and then covering the news about cars. Instead, I'm covering, I'm writing about ventilators and recessions and furloughs, all these things that are sort of related to the car industry now. And so it's, by the end of the day, I'm always, you're always looking at Twitter, you're always checking the news, you're always trying to see what's going on. And I'm just sort of exhausted by the end of the day. So I take a nap. So naps.
I love naps. I find Saturday and Sunday are kind of a nothing day because I will get up, I'll make breakfast, I'll watch some TV, and then I'll just go back to bed. Yeah. It's like, who cares? Doesn't matter. You're not leaving the house anyway.
Doesn't matter. Can't go anywhere. Don't feel bad about taking a nap. Should never feel bad about taking a nap.
I love naps.
Speaking about your nap pod, so let's get right into the meat in it. Tell me about your podcast idea. What do you have for us today?
Let's see. I've noticed, oh man. Well, I've noticed obviously everyone's starting a podcast. This is peak podcast time. I mean, we've got so much time for everything. And
hence this podcast, because I saw a lot of podcast ideas and I was like, oh, most of these are really bad. And then I thought it would be funny to do this. And then you said, yeah, I'll do it. And then a bunch of people said they would do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, part of it was like, I got into snail mail at the beginning of the year. I just kind of decided I wanted to start sending out more postcards. I joined Post Crossing, so I've been getting postcards from all over the world, which is super nice. Mm-hmm. Like I have this Japanese pen pal now, this 50-year-old housewife who like works in a museum gift shop when, I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And I'm deep into snail mail Instagram now. And of course, there's like this one shop called Constellation Co. And the woman who owns it she has two accounts. She has one for the store and then one for herself. That's Snail Mail Superstar. And she just started up a podcast. And I'm like, really? You're going to get a whole podcast out of this, out of like being like the snail mail person. And then I'm like, man, I kind of want a snail mail podcast because I have nobody to talk to about this stuff. I think that's why people start podcasts now. It's like, well, I have a dumb hobby. Nobody wants to hear about it. So I'm just going to record my rants,
So the idea would just be you would go on once a week and record 45 minutes talking about the mail.
I have learned a lot of interesting things about
because there was a movie that was just about the mail. And it had Kevin Costner. And he didn't do so hot.
Hey, that had Tom Petty as Tom Petty in it.
Tom Petty's an amazing musician. Rest in peace, Tom Petty. Yeah. I don't know if I want to see a movie with Tom Petty in it though. So tell me more about what would you do? What would you talk about every week? Would each episode be a segment about mail? Like one week you would talk about like different types of envelopes, another week like stamps, like 1 week you would talk about like your postal workers that you come in contact, maybe the mail like you interview mail carriers. Like, well, how would this all come together? What's your grand vision of your mail podcast?
Well, this is why it's a terrible podcast idea, because I don't know my local postal carrier. I hate going to the post office. There's like the quarantine line outside, and I went just to get an envelope, and like the people in the line were like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I just want priority mail envelope, please have mercy on me." I didn't get the envelope, which sucks. I mean, if I made a podcast, it would probably just be me like, did you know that there is a village that gets its mail delivery by donkey?
So it would be in the like so the mechanics of mail, the podcast. Starring Kris.
Maybe.
And maybe the donkey. If you could get that donkey on, I think you know what? I think you got a Netflix series.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably get canceled after like one season, though I would get some memes. The memes would be great. The memes.
Yeah, you just need the memes. And really, what you want to do is the limited series. Because you do it once, and then you done. You walk away. You do the Watchmen series on HBO. You do one series, everyone's like, oh, what's going to happen next? He's like, nothing, I'm out.
You're bothered by the fact that it is 9 episodes, not 8 or 10?
No.
Like, I thought that was just a weird number.
I was told once by someone at BuzzFeed that when you do a listicle, it should always be an odd number.
Oh, wow. Is there science with that?
If it's BuzzFeed, I feel like there was a science behind it. This is back when BuzzFeed was all the rage, and it was nothing but listicles, and every other Facebook post was your friend talking about a BuzzFeed listicle. And then of course, Facebook decided to screw all the publishers in the world and ask for money in order to share your posts. So.
Yeah, and then there was the pivot to video.
Oh yeah, and the pivot to video with all the lies. If you know what would be better than Facebook? Mail.
Yeah, it was pretty great. I think I've been getting my mail faster nowadays, which is weird because I've been hearing a lot of postal workers have COVID, which sucks. And
my cousin is a postal worker and she has COVID.
Aww.
She's doing well. She's doing good.
Okay, good to hear. I think it's because there's less junk mail going out, which is great. It definitely adds to the whole, like, this is great for the environment that we are creating less garbage right now. Like that's the feeling. And again, the upside for me is I can send a postcard and know it's going to get to like my friend in like a day or two. I remember I sent a postcard to V once. V lives 5 blocks from me and he didn't get it for like 2 weeks. Yeah. Yeah, it's like great. The funny thing is like that's a terrible idea, but like one podcast idea I've been floating, and yes, I'm kind of like changing the subject.
This is the second podcast idea. This is gold for me. 2 podcast idea. This is okay. So what is your so mail podcast, just you rambling about the mail.
Clearly. Yeah.
4 subscribers. One of them, your pen pal in Japan.
Yeah.
And then maybe a postal worker who's seething because you've been talking shit about him. Yeah. Now, what is your second podcast idea?
Yeah, just my final note on the mail thing is that my real plan is to become an Instagram celebrity, like an Instagram snail mail celebrity, and just be on other people's podcasts. So I don't have to like record or edit.
Oh.
That's the easy thing. Just like right here, I get to be on a podcast, but you have to do all the work.
It's not a lot of work. Yeah. Don't. Yeah.
Okay, now you've just proven that my ex-boyfriend is a huge liar because he's like, oh, I got to work on my podcast tonight. It's so much work. Oh, I got to do so much.
I've produced a podcast before, like a real podcast for a publication, and that is a lot of work. There's not going to be any editing. There's nothing. I'm just taking the video and I'm dropping. I'm using iMovie because that's how nothing. I'm not using Premiere. I'm not using nothing. This is the lowest everything. The graphics for this show, I use the Giphy app. Yeah. I wrote the theme song in about 20 minutes. This is the podcast of least resistance.
That's what makes it a terrible podcast about terrible podcasts. So
yeah. So your second podcast idea is?
That one was actually a real idea that I had, and then I was just like, no, this is going to take way too much effort. So I'm in the middle of a complete rewatch of all of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that on Twitter.
Yeah, that's like 800 episodes. I started with the original series because I had finished season 2 of Discovery. And I was like, oh man, here's, Burnham telling Spock that he should like go be gay with Kirk. Now I kind of want to watch Spock go be gay with Kirk. Mm-hmm. So I rewatched the entire original series. That show is way gayer than I realized it was when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then like Picard started up and I was like, wow, now I want to watch Next Generation. And I finished Next Generation 3 weeks ago. And now I'm in like season 4 of DS9. I'm just like, screw it. I'm just going to do the whole thing. And I was like, I need to like, the side hustle thing. Like you're not allowed to have a hobby anymore. Everything has to be like some kind of side hustle. It has to make you money. Yeah, it sucks. But I was like, I should have a podcast where I just like record my thoughts on every episode as I watch them. Mm-hmm. The only reason I've dropped that, you notice, I was live tweeting the episodes. I was like, this is too much work. Oh God, a podcast would be worse somehow.
Because now you have to gather your thoughts post watching it and then read them and talk about them and read them and talk about them. And then you have to edit it all together because if you make a mistake, you don't want to sound like an idiot, which on this podcast, totally fine.
Oh, I'm a complete idiot. I love being an idiot. It's great.
Well, there's the have you heard the Office Ladies?
Office Ladies? No.
So it is a podcast of Jenna and Angela, who played
Oh,
Angela
that
and,
one.
yes, and they are rewatching The Office and doing an episode for each episode, an hour-long episode, an hour-long podcast for each episode of the show, and it is delightful because they're best friends, and there's like dynamic, and they just seem like really nice, fun people that you'd want to hang out with. And they have a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, like how many people, like how they had to, like, instead of hiring a lot of extras, they had dummies, and it's all this weird, like, little, inside baseball stuff, and it is quite nice. But before we go back into your podcast, I have one important question. Are you watching the Star Trek series in chronological order? Because like that one like was before the original. Is it like are you watching in the order that they aired, or in the order that they are in within the greater Star Trek mythology?
I'm watching it in release order. Well, sort of release order, because I'm not like, when the series were concurrent, I'm not jumping back and forth, because that way lies madness, like trying to keep that straight. I mean,
like there's a site out there that's already done, that has it all like figured out.
Yeah. I mean, you can just go on Memory Alpha. I'm sure they have a timeline like listing how the episodes intersect and everything. I know, if you want me to get super nerdy on you right now, I was reading Reddit and someone pointed out, and this, I almost wanted to watch these out of like the order I was watching it, was that how much Star Trek do you watch, by the way? Are you familiar with?
As much as the average person.
Okay. You know who Q is?
I didn't watch Deep Space. I watched a little bit of Deep Space Nine. I didn't watch any really. I watched a lot of The Next Generation. I watched the original. And then I went skateboarding.
Good for you. That's fine. I'm the dork who's rewatching everything for like the third or fourth time, like, because just why not? No, like somebody pointed out, I thought this was actually kind of funny, was that if you watch Deep Space Nine, the episode with Q, and there's the scene where Cisco punches him in the face. And, he's all like, Picard never hit me. And, Cisco's like, I'm not Picard. And, it's funny. And you're like, ha, ha, ha. But someone on Reddit pointed out, like, you realize the next, the TNG episode after that was a Q episode. And he spends the entire episode trying to get Picard to hit him. And I was like, oh, shit, you're not wrong.
I feel like you got to start over. And you have to do this podcast.
Yeah.
But you do like 5-minute podcasts.
Yeah, but it happened to be short, because like trying to live tweet the episodes, I was like, yeah, no. It sucks, because I just want to, like, sometimes I watch it while I'm working and I actually have to do my job.
Oh, yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work can be like really, there's a lot of data entry still, or just,
okay.
We'll just keep it on, and I'm just like, whatever. If I'm writing, I pause it. I'll pause it and like write, and then I'll watch a little more.
So every graph you give yourself
terrible writer, apparently. Sometimes. Like, if you get stuck, yeah.
It's a treat.
Yeah. But no, I would say no. I am not watching it in chronological order. It's not like the freaking Chronicles of Narnia. You know how like they used to be publication order and then they put them in chronological order? I read them in chronological order. It was a terrible idea. The publisher should be whipped for that. Well, it's like book 5, The Magician's Nephew, and there's like a scene, and it's supposed to be set before everything else. So in the chronological thing, it's book number 1, but in release order, number 5. And then there's like this page. I remember being angry at this when I was a child. They were like, and then Aslan showed up, and you all know what Aslan looks like. And I'm like, no, I don't, you fucker. This is book 1.
See, that's the problem, is that you don't have the context, because they were written in a certain order, but when they're put out of order. It's like if you watch the Star Wars in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 15, or however many Star Wars there are. When you're a little kid and you're watching it, and your parent gets really happy because C-3PO and R2-D2 show up, you as a child are like, robots. Robots are everywhere. Who cares?
Yeah, no, it's a weird, like, I'm glad I don't have kids, because that is one of the, like, all of my nerd friends are like, what order should I show these movies to my kids in? And I'm just like, wow, that's a problem. Yeah, that's, I'm sure now they're like, no, the biggest problem I have is educating and feeding my child. But a simpler time.
Simpler times.
Yeah, simpler time when I could just go get ice cream at the store without it turning into like Mad Max. You
The
know?
whole thing.
Yeah.
The thing in the mouth and the face and the thing. And then you get home and you got to clean everything and you got to burn everything you were wearing.
Yeah.
It's a whole,
Yeah, I'm kind of glad, I've always been naturally, I guess, well, rather my mom's like, before this all happened, she's like, how come you don't have any disinfectant wipes? You should buy disinfectant wipes. And you're almost out of Lysol. You need to buy more Lysol. And now I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever, Mom. Thank you for being my mom.
Listen to your mother. If there's anything, well, most of you listen to your mother. That's the takeaway for today's show. Today's show is if you do a male podcast, don't. B, if you do a Star Trek podcast, you should do it in chronological order, not in the order in which they were released, in chronological order, because if you do it in the order in which they were released, everyone, that's a snore fest. But if you do it in chronological order and you talk about what Kris just talked about, which is the idea that Q was punched by Cisco, and in the next episode of TNG, like, Q was trying to get punched by Picard because it turns out he's in the S&M, like you wouldn't, So that's why you got to watch those. If you do that Star Trek, the next rewatch, you got to do them in chronological order, not in the order in which they were released. Call your mom. Listen to your mom.
Yeah.
And,
You know, just bringing up, you saying like Q being in the S&M, just another thing that keeps going through my mind while I was watching TNG was someone saying, if I had to describe TNG to someone, it'd be like, well, the captain's being pegged by a supernatural godlike being. And I'm like, now I can't unsee that either. Like, the internet has just ruined Star Trek. Like, I feel like, oh, that person wants to bone that person and that person. See, that's the third podcast idea, is just like sexy Star Trek.
And on that note, now that we've ruined the next generation for you, we're going to say goodbye for this week's episode and the very first episode. Thank you so much for joining me, Kris. Big thanks to the American Gravel Association for sponsoring this podcast. When you show up, just pull up next to the fence and just dump all the gravel. I'll take care of it when it gets here. I'm Roberto Baldwin. Again, we'll have a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday until people just don't want to talk to me anymore. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Roberto.
Bye.
Bye.